4,000 years ago, a merchant on the coast of what's now the Maldives closed the most important deal of his life. And he paid for it in shells. Cowrie shells, smooth, white, about the size of a thumbnail. That was money. Real money. The kind you'd trust your family's future to. If you could sit that merchant down today and explain that in the 21st century, people pay for houses by transferring invisible numbers between computers, he wouldn't think you were describing the future. He'd think you were describing a mental illness. And here's what's unsettling. Someone, right now, is developing a form of money that would make you react the exact same way. This is Money Origins, the channel where we trace how humans decided what counts as valuable and why that answer keeps changing in ways nobody expects. What we're doing here is walking through the entire evolution of money, from seashells to NFTs, not to give you a history lesson, but to show you a pattern that repeats so consistently it might change how you think about whatever crazy new financial thing is making headlines this week. And there's one stretch of that timeline, about 600 years long, that I think will genuinely surprise you. Quick note, nothing here is financial advice. This is a history and ideas channel, not an investment guide. Here's something that tends to get lost in how we teach monetary history. Cowrie shells weren't some primitive placeholder. They weren't a rough draft of real money. They were a sophisticated currency that dominated trade across Africa, South Asia, and the Pacific for roughly 4,000 years. 4,000. For context, the US dollar has existed for about 250. Cowries had real properties that made them work. They were durable, nearly impossible to counterfeit, naturally uniform in size, portable. They didn't rot, didn't rust, didn't break easily. By most practical standards, they were better engineered for trade than a lot of what came after them. And then, around 600 BCE, something shifted. Kingdoms in Lydia, modern-day Turkey, started stamping lumps of metal with official seals, coins. And suddenly, the people using coins looked at shell users the way you might look at someone trying to pay for coffee with a pebble. The weird money history of cowries didn't end overnight. Shells circulated in parts of Africa into the 20th century, but the perception flipped. Metal was real. Shells were primitive. Even though shells had worked reliably for longer than metal coins have existed to this day. That pattern, the new form looking down on the old, it doesn't just happen once. This is the part of the money timeline that doesn't get enough attention. Paper money was invented in China around the 7th century. Tang Dynasty merchants started using promissory notes because carrying thousands of metal coins across the empire was, frankly, a logistical nightmare. The idea was practical, elegant even, and almost nobody trusted it. It took until the Song Dynasty, roughly the 11th century, for paper currency to gain serious government backing in China. Even then, overprinting led to inflation so severe that entire monetary systems collapsed. The Yuan dynasty printed so aggressively that their paper became nearly worthless. Now here's what matters. When European traders encountered Chinese paper money, many of them were genuinely baffled. Marco Polo wrote about it in the 13th century with the tone of someone describing a magic trick, not quite believing it actually functioned. Europe didn't widely adopt paper currency until the 17th century. That's 600 years of resistance. 6 centuries of people holding a coin in one hand and a banknote in the other and saying, "This isn't real, this is just paper." Think about that next time someone says digital currency history is too new to trust. Paper was too new to trust for 600 years. And now you wouldn't think twice about handing someone a 20. So we've watched shells give way to metal, and metal resist paper for centuries. The pattern holds. But the next jump happens faster, and that acceleration is part of what makes it harder to see clearly. The evolution of money has a speed problem. Specifically, it keeps getting faster. Shells dominated for millennia. Coins lasted centuries as the primary standard. Paper took 600 years to gain full acceptance, then reigned for a few hundred more. Digital money through ages of banking infrastructure? That transition happened in roughly 50 years. Your grandparents might remember a world where every significant transaction involved physical cash. Now, most money exists as entries in databases, numbers on screens, not even paper, just trust encoded in software. And then cryptocurrency arrived, roughly 15 years ago, compressing the adoption debate into a single generation. Then NFTs compressed it further, going from unknown to a multi-billion-dollar market to widespread skepticism in about 3 years. Here's where I want to be honest about the limits of this pattern. Recognizing that every previous generation was wrong about the next form of money does not mean every new thing claiming to be the future of money will succeed. Most won't. The pattern tells us the general direction. It doesn't validate every specific experiment along the way. Some of those experiments will look, in hindsight, exactly as absurd as their critics said. But the broader trajectory, money becoming more abstract, more digitally native, less physically tangible, that trajectory has pointed in one direction for 4,000 years, and it hasn't reversed once. Not once. When you compare NFTs versus ancient currency, the surface difference is enormous. But the underlying shift from "I can hold this" to "I can trust this" is the same shift that's happened at every single transition in monetary history. The future of money, whatever form it takes, will almost certainly continue that pattern, and it will almost certainly feel wrong to us. So let's go back to that merchant in the Maldives, the one holding his cowrie shells, certain he understood what money was. Every generation after him had that same certainty. The coin user who couldn't fathom paper, the paper user who couldn't fathom digits. Each one was standing at the edge of a change they couldn't yet recognize because the new thing looked nothing like what they'd learned to trust. We're standing at that same edge right now. And the honest answer to what comes next isn't Bitcoin, isn't NFTs, isn't any specific technology. It's something we probably can't describe yet, because if we could describe it comfortably, it wouldn't be the real next step. The real next step, by definition, is the one that sounds like a mental illness until it doesn't. Worth keeping in mind, none of this is a prediction or a recommendation. It's a pattern. What you do with it is your call. If this kind of long-view thinking about money appeals to you, the next one goes deeper into a specific moment where the line between visionary investment and collective insanity disappeared completely. The tulip mania of 1637, the first financial bubble in recorded history. That story has more to say about today than you'd expect.